Okay, we're going to start Sikha of Parsha Shmini and Chelik Yud Zayin. This Sikha, the Rebbe introduces with the concept that when we deal with a, by the way, it's going to be, you're going to have to go from the left side of the page to the right side of the page. You see, 92 and 93. It's going to be on every side of the copy is going to be that way. So, the Rebbe is going to explain how everything in Parsha Shmini, even things that don't seem to relate to Parsha Shmini, has to be under the name of Shmini. Whereas in some ways you could say that Parsha Shmini is more related to Parsha Tzav. Still in all, what's in Parsha Shmini belongs in Parsha Shmini. What's in Parsha Tzav is a whole different thing, even though it seems that there's a continuation. And with this, he's going to explain a basic concept of what's going to happen when Mashiach comes with the Gilui L'kus in the world. And it's going to be hinted also in Parsha Shmini by the content that's in the Parsha. The fact that it's 53 Sedres, is B'chol Parsha hi inim b'fnei atzmo mikol mokim zeh guf shekol Parshas nikrois yachad b'seder achras u'echocha l'kach sheyeshna nekuda mishutef mechaberes b'nei. So regardless of the fact that you have very, very different things in one parsha, but if they're called all under the same name, so that same name means that they're really one thing. Muvan shanekuda tichoyna sheyeshna b'chol inyonei hasedra remuza b'shem hasedra shayishmois hasedra same shemus al pi Torah. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Shari Yichud V'Emunah, that the name of something, whatever something is called, that is the chayis of that thing. So the entire parsha, which is called Shmini, has to do with it. Parsha he's using over here in the Lashon Kodesh as meaning section of a parsha. He's using parsha and sedra as two distinct terms. So the difference between the Parsha Rishonim and the Parsha Achronim, one Sedra, Godel min achiluk min Parsha Rishonim shebesedra, la Parsha Achronim shel Sedra shlafna. That when you look at the topic in one particular area, let's say we're going to explain this. What's at the beginning of Parsha Shmini is not so far and distant from what's the end of Parsha Tzav. It's really one hemshech. It's going to be, the end of Parsha Tzav speaks about the 7 days of the Miluim. The beginning of Parsha Shmini speaks about the 8th day of the Miluim. And that's why they have a connection between them. That according to Torah, you darshan from things that are close by each other in Torah. While at the same time, Mikol Mokim, Hanekudam Shutef Sanal Yeshna Davke Parshis Elu Afshein Tzmuchashem Ba'is Sedra. So when you have different sections in the same Sedra under the same name, they're connected in a much stronger way because they're all under the same name. Beis Manal move on Gam Negela Parshis saying Afshe Mitzad Echad Yesh Las Chol Sat Sedra Vahi B'Yom Shmini Shayches Osima Sedra Shel Fanah Harbi Yoser. At the end of our parsha, we talk about the animals that are kosher animals, animals that are not kosher animals. So Parsha Shmini, the beginning of Parsha Shmini, is talking about how the Mishkan was finally put into operation. It's the 8th day after the Miluim, so it seems to have a lot more of a connection with what's going on in the previous parsha than the end of the parsha about Chayis Tmeis. Moving gam Parsha Shvayhi b'Yom Shmini, ba behemshech l'shivas yimei Miluim shebesima seder kedamis. V'ilu l'zois achaya ein l'kach l'choyre kol shayches. There's no connection with the idea of the animals that are kosher, not kosher. In the me'achar shalachol seder yesh nekuda miyuchedes sheboy nivdels mikol sedres la'achedes. So that is a unique property of this seder. That's called Parsha Shmini, and that makes it unique and different than Parsha Tzav or any other Parsha in the Torah. Moving to a Parsha is Vayihi B'Yom Shmini, all the different parts of our Sedra. V'zois Achaya, יש תוכן מיוחד השווה בשתיהם, שאינוי בפרשס כחס ארן. כחס ארן is the end of the previous parsha, where it talks about the Shivas Yimei HaMiluyim. The teuchen zeh, and the common denominator between all the topics in our parsha, nirmas b'shem hasedra shmini. The Rebbe goes on to say, mi'achar b'shem hasedra, ein remez l'kach shemedubar the shmini l'miluyim. Let's look at the name. The name is not called Shmini l'miluyim. It's just called Shmini. Va'af loy l'kach shemedubar kan b'yoyim shmini klal. It doesn't even say the word Yom Shmini in the name of the parsha. In other words, the way Yidden, throughout all the generations, throughout history, called this parsha, they didn't even call it Yom HaShmini or Yom Shmini. Sha'arei hasedra eina nekras Yom Shmini el Shmini stam. Moving, it's understood Shemash Negeh kan hu ha'inyan to the left side, to the right side of the page. Haklali the Shmini v'loy ha'inyan ha'prati miluyim ayamim. It doesn't make a difference that it's an 8th day to what was going on before. That it talks about the inyanim of the Miluyim. It talks about the training that the Bnei Aaron went and the training of the Mishkan. And comes out that all of that is rak hagdama l'shmini. It's only an introduction to it. Aval ein chelik mishmini kishem shepashtas shivas yimei hameluyim hem hagdama l'yem hashmini. Just like in the simple sense, the shivas yimei hameluyim is only an introduction to the 8th day. The same thing, the parsha of Tzav, the end of parsha Tzav is only an introduction to parsha Shmini, but it's not part of parsha Shmini. Masha'enk in parsha Zoisachaya, where it talks about what's kosher and not kosher, he chelik mishmini gufa. Yuvam behegdem bir shnei aktzavas shematzinu b'toichen ha-mispar Shmini. The number 8 is very distinct and significant in Yiddishkeit and in Chassidus a lot. Says mitzad echad moira mispar Shmini al inyan hamuvdol be'erkei min hazayin shekol ukimevur b'klei yakar shekol inyane habriya hem b'mispar zayin v'ilu hamispar Shmini hu miyuchad elav yizbarach. There's also an expression that says Aleph concerning Shmini, Aleph roichev al zayin. 1 that's on top of 7. You have the 7 that has to do with Bria, like we're soon going to talk about, and the 8th is something totally removed. Va'pirish b'zehu k'mevor b'kam mekaymes sha'mispar shiva koilo loy rak es inyane abriya gufa ela nichlol boy gam ha'oira liki ha'mislabish b'bria. V'ilu Shmini meramez ala oir shalamayla mislapshis ba'oilam b'chinas ha'oir shalamayla mishtalshus. In other words, in the Klei Yakar, he doesn't talk about things about the oir of the Bria and things like that. All he says is the creation is divided into the number 7. There's 7 days of the week and so on. 7 Shemitahs, etc. Or 7 years of a Shemitah, and there's 7 Shemitahs, then you hit Yovel, you have 7 weeks of Sir Sa'omer and so on. But Chassidus goes even further and says there's the Chayas Ha'olamus. There's the life force and vitality of the worlds, and in the worlds, there's the Chayas that's connected with the world, there's the Elikus that's connected with the world, and there's that aspect of Elikus that's totally beyond the world. So the part of Elikus that has to do with the world, that's the part of the number 7. And that aspect that's totally beyond everything, that is the number 8. And actually in the footnote he says that even Soviv Kolalmin still has to do with the world, and therefore it's still included in the number 7. The Aleph, Roichev al Zayin, the number 8, that is totally beyond that as well. Along with what we just now said, that number 8 shows on something totally beyond. Mashmos hateva Shmini gufa moira al kach she'ein ze inin b'fnei atzmai ela zeu inyan sheyesh lo shayches aba behemshech l'inyanim shel shiva. It's a continuation. You can't have 8 if you don't have the 7 beforehand. Zeu achidush be'inyan Shmini. What is the perfection? What is the best way of Elikus to be Nizgala? That you have the best of both worlds. Tachas hakavani hi shagam ha'or shel ha'mayla mishtalshlus yumshach begilui ba'olam. V'davar zeh merumas b'tevis shmini shetoichna shagam ma shemuvdol v'nayla ben abriyam haynu b'chinas shiva kanal b'kli yakar yeh ba'ofen shel shmini ha'shayach l'b'chinas zayin l'inyon abriyam. This is something that the Rebbe always speaks about, that we need to take that which is beyond creation and bring it into creation. It's not about leaving this world, it's about drawing down the highest levels in the world. So that's the number Shmini. On the one hand, it's beyond 7, it's beyond the world. On the other hand, it's connected to the 7, that's why it's called the 8th. It'll have 8 strands. Pirush sha'af shekvoid avayu l'mayla be'ein aroich ma'abriya yeh ze begilui be'oifim shel v'ro kol basar be'riya muchshis shel ha'basar ha'gashmi. Literally, with our own sense of sight, that the human flesh is able to see things, it will see godliness. Ad shegilui b'chinas kvoid avayu yeh loy b'derech chidush elo b'derech pshitus ba'olam ha'gashmi. I heard Yoel speak about this, and he said the B'negei of V'nigla Kvoid Avaya, there's 2 things over here in the Pasuk. One thing is V'nigla Kvoid Avaya. V'nigla Kvoid Avaya means it becomes revealed from above. Why is the ad V'ro Kol Basar? V'ro Kol Basar means it becomes part of the world of the Basar. Just like now, the flesh and the eyes of flesh see things. It's not a chiddush when the eye sees. The same thing when Mashiach comes, V'ro Kol Basar will not be just some type of miraculous thing, V'nigla Kvoid Avaya, but it will be in a way of V'ro Kol Basar because, and out of, in a pshitistic way, and it will be natural to it. V'hainu sheri'iyas ha'basar ha'gashmi. As Kvoid Avaya, tiye metzad chunois v'teva, go to 94, metzias ha'gashmis, kefi shetia oz. That's going to be the nature of things. That's in a natural way. So then it's not that the world is a different world. It's not that the world becomes naturally in tune with Hashem. Azai gilu elakus ba'olam afilu kasher uba b'riya muchashis hi ba'ofen shel chidush zau chidush v'yisafa ba'olam kiven sheriyas habasar as kvoid avaya einoi mitzad tivoi. Then it's not natural. Then it's a ness. We're not talking about that gilu elakus and the world should be in a way that's a ness. And the Rebbe gives an example about this. He says in footnote 20, he says an interesting point. It says when Mashiach comes, there's a pasuk, it says, Ve'eshpech esruchi al kol basar. I will pour out my spirit on all the flesh. In other words, everybody will say Nevuah. What does that mean? In the times, let's say in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, when there were Nevi'im, there was all types of qualifications that a person had to go through to be able to be zoiche to nevuah. Ein shchina shoyre al gibur and chacham and etc. etc. There's all different types of things that you have to go through. Why? Because in the times before Mashiach's times, nevuah, gilui elokus, was something foreign to the world. So the only place where it could come down is some type of person that was different. But when Mashiach comes, everybody's going to see Elokus. There are no preconditions. There's no, you got to do this and you got to do that. Why? Because the entire world will be such a type of world that naturally will see godliness. Hapirish ha'amiti shel b'derech pshitasu sherias habasar la'asidas kvaydavaya tiyam etzad chunas v'teva habasar gufa ba'oisei ha'oifin she'enei basar rois dvarim gashrim shezel mitzad ha'teva v'atchunas shel enei habasar atzmam. So just like when I see something on this table with my physical eye, and I can read the Sefer with my physical eye, when Mashiach comes, it'll be just the same the way I'll see Elokus. Inyan v'nigla kvoid avaya v'ro kol basar she's chadish b'yimois Mashiach mizbate is beis ksavas hanal shebechir shmoina kvoid avaya hina nailo muvdol be'erkim in abriyesh v'mispar zayin. It has nothing to do with this world. V'afal pikein yizgala ba'olam ba'ofen kazeh shahadavar Riyas hagilu yim etzad teva olam gufa shmini hahoylach yachtav shiva. That's the way it's going to become revealed in the world. So now the Rebbe is going to pose a very obvious question. We know that the world was built and made in such a way that Elokus should be concealed. Olam meloshen helam. How is it possible that at the very same time you're saying that the very nature of the world, the very build of the world is olam meloshen helam, and at the same time you're saying, hold on, when Mashiach comes, the nature of the world will be to see Elokus. So it's not, you're saying it'll be natural to the world, but then that's not natural, because that's not the world is called olam for a reason, because it's concealment on godliness. How could it be that the natural state of the world is something that's contrary to the world? Then it's not natural. Then it's supernatural. Then it's a nes. Then it's outside the realm of this world. Then it's not shmini. Then it's just stam. Like we said, the gilui lakus, shmini shows that it has to do with the seven. The gilui lakus has to have to do with the world. This has nothing to do with the world. The world is lashon hell. Let's see the question inside. Vav. Al tzarich lahavin matzav ha'olam ata ba'ofen she'ein niras ba'elakus. I feel like dargas halakus shebe'erech habriyam, which is even the lower level, the level that we said before is included in the seven. Hareyu loikedavar noisef al metzias ha'olam. The fact that the world doesn't see godliness, that's not something new to the world. Ela me'achar sha'olam nivra ba'ofen kazeh v'im kein kivun sha'helam v'ahester sheba'olam mitzad etzem mitziyusay of the world. The Mahai Taima Nikra B'Shem Olam, top of the page on the right, 95. Shari Shmoy Shel Kol Davar Mevate Es Toichnoi HaIkri. So it's Maloshin Helam. This is what it's about. The fact that it's called Olam, therefore it's Helam. Eich Yitachin Shekiyum V'Ro Kol Basar La'asid La'asid La V'Yim Tzad Inyan HaBasar Gufa B'Shosh Zo Heipach Geder V'Tchunas HaBasar, which is a olam. Then it's not something that's coming revealed b'pshitas in the world. Then it's a chiddush. So the Rebbe is going to bring this based on a question in Tanya Perek Lamed Zayin. In Tanya Perek Lamed Zayin, the Alter Rebbe explains about the dir b'tachtoinim, the gilui elokus that will take place when Mashiach comes. And over there he says a very interesting thing about how our Torah mitzvahs causes that gilui elokus. But the Alter Rebbe inserts something that seemingly is not negated to the concept. And based on that, the Rebbe is going to explain our answer. The Alter Rebbe adds, totally b'maseinu v'odisenu, when kol zman meshach hagolus. It should have said, totally b'maseinu v'odisenu. Why does it add kol zman meshach hagolus? V'lechura ma'u adir kol zman meshach hagolus dafke. Harima shayde maseinu v'odisenu on the poilim is gilu yoresav baruch hu b'olam hazeh hagashmi. Zeh mitzad mailas hamitzvahs. Rabbeinu Zochen Sham Gufa, Shabasiyos Shal Mitzvah, Mamshech Adam Gilu Yoresav Baruch Hu Mamayla Matal, Islabish Begashmi Solam Hazeh. So that is what mitzvahs can do. Mitzvahs act like a channel. They act like a vehicle, a means to draw down Yoresav into this world. So why does the Alter Rebbe add these words of Zman HaGolus? V'im kibamek kosher hadavar l'zman meshach hagolus dafke. In the times of the Beis Hamikdash, it was any less? So he's going to explain, yes. It was still missing something. It did, in general, it did draw down Elokus, but dafka in the time of Golus, it'll have something that's above and beyond anything that took place in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. The hechrech sham shochas ha'lekus shaydei mitzvahs Shehi hamshacha shetavi l'dei gilui l'asad lavoi, loy tia kedavar noisav ba'olam. Like we said before, we want it to become the pshitis in the world. It shouldn't be a chiddush. So how do we make sure that when our avodah and Torah mitzvahs draws down the Oid and Sof in the world, it draws it down in such a way that this is part of the world, not something outside the world that's coming in? V'hainu sha'mitzvahs poilis rak sheba'olam yitoisef oil leki ha'olam gufa nifshar kvish oil defneichein mitzad esavas oil loshen helm. It shouldn't be that way. That it should be only that the world is still world. The world is still Helam. But on top of that Helam, you have the mitzvahs to deal with it and to handle the Helam. No, that's not what we're saying. It has to be more than that. Ela sham shachar sha'idei mitzvah tia ba'ofen shi mishana u'mehapeches es gashmis ha'olam hazeh. V'lachein hagilu di Moshe Mashiach tolib masein over the same who calls mamesh chagolas. Kivin shinyazesh b'mitzvahs. L'shanis u'lahapeches ha'olam gufim. That's the type of mitzvahs that cause that the oilam itself, even though it's called helam, the alakus that's going to become revealed in the world will not be a chiddush for the world. It'll be natural to the world. It'll be normal to the world. It won't be a davar noisef. It won't be something additional to the world. And the Rebbe is going to explain how. Why is it that way? What is it about doing mitzvahs in the time of Golus that causes that the world, even though world is helam, the idea of an iyas alakus is something that's natural. Even without going into this idea of golus. In general, why mitzvahs in general causes something that makes the world a different place? That's why the world was created. Hainu shebnei Yisrael yiflu idei Torah mitzvesa gilu elakus ba'olam. V'nimtza shegilu elakus shenimshach ba'olam idei Yisrael va'Torah einoi inyan haba kedavar noisef al mitziyusay. Why? Because that's the reason that the world was created. The whole entire reason for the creation was because of this. Kimiachar shegilu elakus idei Yisrael va'Torah hu hakavana va'tachlis she'olam gufam harei pirush hadavar sha'olam gufa primiyusay tayveya shetushlam tachlisay, which is, what is the tachlis of the world? His galus alakus b'yadei Torah mitzvah shemekayim Yisrael. So even though olam means helam, but since this whole olam and this whole helam was created so that Yidden should do Torah mitzvahs, so olam is looking, the helam itself is looking for that Gilu Elakus that takes place through the Yidden and Torah mitzvahs. Aval bezel levad adayin lo dai. Kimachar shegeder olam loshen helam kanal hainu shemitzad habriyad, page 96. Hine etza mitzias ha'olam hikazu she'ein murgeshes ba'atachlis hatzricha liyiskayim ba va'adraba ha'olam mitzad briyasei inyane helam. Nimtza shebachol hanagel mitziyusei v'inyane shelo olam gufam hamshachas elakus shaydei hamitzvos ikimay davar noisav. Because the world itself is saying, I am helam. True, the world is waiting for you to break my helam. But if you break my helam, so then I'm not world anymore. And we want that it should be world, and a world that sees elakus naturally. The shilos of Miyashevas idea kviyah shemasha gilu delos and nifla idea masein over the seinu hareze beikir kol zman meshach hagolus kidl kamon. When it's golus, that's we are doing our Torah mitzvahs in. So then this has the real accomplishment. V'vur b'chsidus b'kama mekaymus shebizman hagolus meir koyach hamesiras nefesh yoyser masher bizman habayis ki davka hahelam v'ahester bizman hagolus. In a time when there's no Helam v'Hester, so that deep part of our nefesh, that's necessary and is the source for Mesiras Nefesh, the Etzem HaNefesh, the Nekudas HaChachman, the Nekudas HaYadas, the Alter Rebbe speaks about in Pei Yud Ches, Yud Tes, and Tanya, that remains dormant, that remains quiet. We don't hear from it. Dafka in the time of Golus, when we are challenged in our avodah and Torah mitzvahs, we have things that stand in the way. That challenge itself causes the highest gilui of the nefesh of a yid. That high gilui of a nefesh of a yid is not found in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. That high gilui of the etzem of a yid is only found when there is the helam of Golus, when there is Mesiras Nefesh. Ketzad you're talking shehelam yer gilui shel Mesiras Nefesh, b'shah shehelam v'giluim havchim. A very logical question. If the concealment of the world is concealment, and you're talking about a revelation of the etzem, this is revelation, this is concealment. There are two opposites. How can concealment contribute and act as a trigger for revelation? So he says, it's a natural thing. We know that the more you conceal, the more you hide, the more it causes that you want to reveal. That the soul has a greater control over the heel, which has less feeling than when it comes to the head. And therefore it's brought down the Mashal Chassidus when it comes to going into a hot mikveh and it's boiling hot, so then it's something that the heel will go in easier than the head. Even though begashmis there might be a different reason, whatever. But the point is because the bittul is dafke in something where there's more of the nefesh concealed. The heel is the least place where the nefesh is evident. Where in the roish, there's more evidence of the nefesh. So the nefesh should be a bigger balabas over the head than it is over the heel. But it's not that way. Dafke there where the nefesh is felt the least, that has the biggest bittul to what the nefesh wants.
It's like in Tanya where he says that the mate is naser to zochios because you feel so much the bitterness of it.
It itself that's going to be more than a kudah of the answer. Mm-hmm. That the helam itself is going to contribute, but the Rebbe is going to ask, why is this the nature in the world that way? In other words, a lot of times in Chassidus, we bring a mashal to understand some high concept from a physical thing. But the question is, why did Eibishter even make it that way with the foot? Why taki is it that in my nefesh, the foot is more likely, the heel is more likely to reveal and to follow the directions of my nefesh, the rots of my nefesh, than my head is. If where my nefesh is more revealed is in the head. The Abir Bezeh, top in the second column on 96. Kedei shetismala kavanos abriya liyas dir lo yizbarach b'tachtoinu. Sha'olam atzma yiyah dira la'akadosh baruch hu gam etzad tivoi. As we were talking about from the beginning of the Sikha. Bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ha'olam ba'oifen shemishtakefes by hakavana v'atachlis by. That's expressed in the world. U'mi'achar sha'akavana b'kach sha'olam nivra ba'oifen shal helem v'hester hi kedei shemetoich kach yifia gili naila yoiser yisron ha'ir min ha'choshech. The Eibishter wanted that olam meloshen helem should be the catalyst, the cause for a greater gili. Lachein nikva teva olam ba'ofen kazeh shedafka ha'helem ye'oirer v'yekli la'or naila b'yoiser. And that's takir, the reason why the foot is more likely to follow through than the head is. Because the whole point is that Eibishter wants that the world should be helem, and that very helem itself should be an instrument of gili. Before we actually see what it's out to accomplish and what its purpose is, or toisves v'yisrael de kima mitzvahs, lachen gilu elikus ba'olam shnei kima mitzvahs, kashur l'metzias ha'olam gufa, because it's the world itself that's causing a greater gilu. In other words, the Rebbe a lot of times speaks about there's two types of ways how something can overcome a helem. One is despite the helem. The oir is so great, which is the nekudah that he said before he talked about pshittas. The oir is so great, it overwhelms the helem. But then the helem is not contributing. It's despite the helem that you have the gili. But the point is that the world itself, the helem of the world itself, should be the reason for the gili. and therefore that the Gilui should be part of the Helam itself. So it's necessary to put into place that the Helam itself, the Olam itself, should be the cause of the Gilui. V'zeu bi'ra kvi'anal. Gilui the law, the Alter Rebbe says over there in Lamed Zayin, Perek Lamed Zayin, told him, Maseinu Odseinu Kols Mamesh Chagolos, Ki mitzad Amsiris Nefesh, Mizman Hagolos, Mizgale, V'nikir, Behelam, Ha'olam Gufa, Sha'akavona B'hi Gilui Alakus Anim Shchadei Torah Mitzvahs. V'zoi Asiba Lakach, Sha'am Shachas Alakus, to page 97, the right side of your copies, Sha'idei HaMitzvahs B'zman Hagolos, Pa'elas b'yeser seis u'mislabeshes yoser b'metzias shel gashmias olam hazeh. That's the Alter Rebbe wants to say in Perek Lamed Zayin. It's not in the olam esol yonim. It's dafke here in this physical world, because only the physical world triggers a deeper connection with Hashem. Guf ad shelasid lava yavay adavar begilui shekiyim v'nigluk v'davaya v'ro kol basar. The flesh should actually see it. Yim mitzad chunas v'teva basar gufa. So now that we understand that when Mashiach comes, there's going to be this joining of two opposites. You have the highest level of Elokus, but the highest level of Elokus comes about davke mitzad the world itself, not despite the world, but as a result of the world, as a result of the Helam of the world, as a result of the Mesiras Nefesh that I need to have, that I need to like fight the world to be able to bring Elokus into this world. So now we can understand the connection between the beginning of Parshat Shmini, even with the end, Zois Achaya Asher Techelu, what's kosher and what's awesome. Yud, Pi Kol Anal, Yuvan Achiluk Ben Shech Chusa, Shel Parshat Shmini Lesim Parshat Sav, Shel Lefanah, Lebein Sheiches Parshat Zois Achaya Le Parshat Shmini Gufa, Bezayin Yemei Hamilui, top of page 97, Shaleim Meduber Besim Parshat Sav. What was it then? Then was what the Bnei Aaron did. It wasn't a Gili from above. The Gili from above, the Gili Lakus only came by Yom HaShmini. It was what the Bnei Aaron did. They had to do their avodah, they had to do their chinuch, they had to prepare the Mishkan. Ishlimu Aaron the Bonav is called the Afshari Lifala the avodah Shalamata. It's avodah from down here. Koilol Hamshachas Alakus and Hamshachas Aidei Srusel Satan Nichlalos B'Bchina Zayin. They also drew down that level of godliness. That's part of the number 7. Like we said, the number 7 is not just the creation, but also the godliness that is in creation, the lakus that's in the Bria. Which is in our parsha. Tzav, we said before, is only a preparation for our parsha, Parsha Shmini. That's when it took place, the Ashras HaShchina. The preparation of Parshat Sav ensured that now, when the Alkus is going to come down, it's going to permeate the 7. The 8 is going to permeate the 7. Shebechinas Alkus Hamavdelos Lagamri Min Abriya Tiekshura Gam Linyon Abriya Shemispar Zayin. Page 98. Bash'en came Parshas Zoy Sachaya Isekas Bachayis Ubehemis Tmeis V'chulu Ubi Yisra Chilosim V'tumosim Shayeches El V'hi Chelik Me Parshas Shmini Atzma. How come? Zichuch ha'olam loshen helam. Shaydeze mizgala v'nikar b'shleim shakavana boy l'shem gila l'kuz. Hayne b'chinas ha'oir ha'muvdul l'gamri min abriyam. Nifal aydeze sheyeshna mitzius v'nesinas makim lahelam yoser. What is a helam? You don't hear anything about helam at the end of Parshat Sav. You don't hear about helam even at the beginning of Parshat Shmini. Where do you hear about helam? At the end of our Parsha. L'chayis u'behemis tmeis. You hear about non-kosher food, non-kosher animals. V'afal pikei. Despite that there is something that's a helam and a lakuz, gimel klipsat meis, non-kosher things, miskayim lahavdol ben atomei ben atoyer ben achayin achels ben achayin shaloi seyochel ubedugmas maimer azal al yomer adam I efshi basar chazir ela efshi u'ma'esa avishav shemaim gazer alai. Which means it's not about the geschmack that I might have. I might want to eat a piece of chazer, but it's about the helam itself is contributing to the gilui lakus. Shaydeze nasa zichuch gam ba'oisei helam sheyesh b'in nesinas mokim l'chayis u'behemis tmeis Ukidivra medrash al pasuk zois habehema lo nitnu hamitzvos liyisrael elo litzaref be'emes habriyos. What does litzaref mean? Tziruf kan pirushay zichuch. So in other words, the whole reason why we have such type of mitzvahs is to cause the gilui oyer that comes dafke from a challenge, dafke from a helam, dafke from something that we have to say, I would love to, but I'm not going to do it. So then, nifal hagilui de shmini, hainu shegilui alakus shalamayl lagamri ma'olam mizgala b'sheva. We wanted to have the connection with the seven. V'zay nasahu l'shmini, hainu shu mizgalo misachet b'briya gufa kanal barucha. And now the Rebbe is going to connect it with a very gishmak and medrash. We said that this has to do with the whole idea of meshach zman hagolos. So there's a medrash that actually connects this end of Parsha Shmini about the animals that you could eat and the animals that you can't eat, that it's actually talking about the different golos and the different malchios that Yidden were subjugated to. Valpiza Yuvim Gam Maimer Medrash Oides Harem Shebechayis Atmeyes Moshe Ras HaMalchios B'Yisukon. Moshe Rabbeinu saw the governments that would imprison, that would subjugate the Yidden in their involvement, in their doing their thing. In that Medrash, in Vayikra Rabbah, it speaks in detail about the concealment of every single golus and how they're hinted to and are connected with the different non-kosher animals that says at the end of our parsha. Because it's like we said before, Kol's man meshach golus. It's dafke the helam of golus that triggers and brings out the deepest gilui elokus. Kivin shachidish v'agilu shel zois achai gomer lahavdol gomer. Hu ha'inyan ha'niflai de'agolias sham shachem is that they fear begilui la'asid lavi Kinor of Moshiach that the stringed instrument they played in the Beis Hamikdash had 8 strands. Ukasiyam ha'medrash v'esachazer zu edom chulu v'lama nikra shma chazer shemechazeres atara lebayleha. Edom is Golus. Edom is the longest Golus. It's our final Golus. It's called Golus Edom. And yet we're saying that this Golus itself is the one that's Mechazeres Atara L'Bala. Hado d'chsiv v'olu mashim ba'atzim l'shpoitz ha'reisa v'hois l'ashem ha'mlucha. So we see that from Edom we're coming into the Geula of Mashiach, meaning that Edom is the cause. The Golus again is the cause and the reason why there is this type of revelation, why there is this gilui oir that's way beyond Seder Ishtalshalos. So then it's the actual physical flesh that's able to see because it's coming from the world itself, from Golus itself, like the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Lamed Zayin.